It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Charlotte Weber. Your maiden name was Berenbaum, and you were born in Antwerp, in Belgium. Charlotte, can you tell us a little bit about your family and the history?
Yes. My father was a diamond dealer in Antwerp. Many Jews were diamond dealers. My mother was a housewife, and my brother is 5 years older than me. His name is Henry, or was Henry, and I was born in Antwerp, Belgium.
In what year were you born?
1937.
And you have a picture of your parents and their wedding?
That's their wedding photo.
And were your parents many generations in Belgium?
No, they were Polish, but when they were very young, they moved to Cologne in Germany.
And then when did they come to Antwerp?
I'm not sure, but in the early 30s, I think.
And you have such a beautiful picture of your brother as well. Do you know how old you were in this picture?
I was 1.5. My brother must have been 6.5.
And did you come from quite a traditional family?
Yes, very traditional. My grandfather had a beard. My grandmother had a wig, a scheitel. My parents weren't as religious as my grandparents, and we were very traditional.
And Charlotte, can I ask, what is the earliest recollections that you have?
I don't have before age 5. I told my story and I referred to my brother for the earlier years. We moved quite a bit in Antwerp before the war, and after the war.
And do you remember, what do you remember from the war years? How were you?
I remember going into hiding. I was about 5 years old by then. So I remember from then.
And you remember, did you go with your brother together or?
With my mother, my aunt, my grandparents, and my brother. We were hidden together.
And your father?
My father got to England. We were separated. At the beginning of the war, we went to France, which wasn't yet at the war. And we wanted to get on a ship to England. We went down south near Bordeaux, and my father and my uncle went to the port with my mother and my aunt, and we were left behind with my grandparents. And when a boat would take us, my mother and my aunt went back to collect us. They weren't letting civilians on the boat. And one day they let civilians go on. And my father and my uncle went to get places, and my mother and my aunt went back for us. And when they got to the port, the boat had left. My father and my uncle were on it. So I didn't see my father for about 6 years.
And do you remember your father? Do you have recollections before your father left?
No, I didn't know my father anymore. It was 1940. I was about 2 years old.
You were too young, sure.
Yeah, I was a baby. So I didn't know my father when I met him again.
And how did your mother manage to find a place to hide?
We were very lucky. I think my mother was a very modest, quiet person. But I imagine in my later years, she was a heroine. She was in her 30s when my father managed to get to England, and she took care of my brother, myself, my grandparents, and my aunt was a bit of a depressive person. She had 2 daughters, and we were all together. And then she found somebody who was a bit shady, who said he would be able to hide us. That was in 43.
And was this in France?
No, we went back to Belgium.
You went back to Belgium.
The Germans said, go back to where you lived before. We won't harm you. But they did. So we went back to our flat in Antwerp. And then when things got very bad, in 43, they rounded up any Jews. So we had to decide to go into hiding.
Do you remember maybe you were too young to wear the star?
I wasn't. I was too young.
And
my brother
and your mother?
did wear the star.
And do you recall this?
Yes.
Seeing your brother with the star and your mother?
Yeah, actually I have a photo, but you can't see. He was wearing a star.
And what family managed to take you in hiding?
We were very lucky. This man took us to a village called Godin-sur-Meuse in the French-speaking part of Belgium. It was surrounded by mountains with a big river, the Meuse, which is well known. And it was a place for holidays, very pretty, and it was October then. So he knocked on a door of a house and said, people want to rent a flat, a place. So this couple, Monsieur and Madame Morin, were very happy in October to have somebody rent their place. So we came there, but we were too big a family. My aunt had 2 daughters, and a priest was willing to take 2 girls. So we decided in the end, not my cousin and me, but the 2 sisters would go. So my aunt remained with us. And she didn't see her daughters. She didn't know where they were. So she didn't see them till the end of the war.
And she didn't know if they were still alive or what had happened?
No, she couldn't be in touch with them.
That must have been so difficult for her. Must have been
And
such a
she
trauma.
was depressed a lot of the time. So my mother had to look after her as well. And my grandmother died a few months after we went into hiding. She had cancer. And she was buried in Brussels in a non-Jewish cemetery because there are no Jewish cemeteries in Belgium. So we were there, and then eventually the couple realized we were Jewish because we didn't go out. My mother asked them to buy food on the black market. We didn't have enough registered stamps.
Did you have any false papers?
My mother and my aunt had false papers. The rest of us didn't. So eventually, after a couple of months, two officers, German officers, there was the headquarters of a unit of army, German army. And we had soldiers, German soldiers, running around all the time.
And you remember, you recall? Did you ever see them? Did you?
Yes, eventually I played with the other children in the street. My brother and I didn't go to school, which was probably peculiar. And two officers came. Somebody told them that there were Jews living in that house. And my grandparents were ill in bed, and they only saw my mother and my aunt with the false papers. My brother and I hid under a bed. And they didn't go into the other rooms. They were not SS or Gestapo. They were just army officers.
Do you remember that incident?
I remember them knocking on the front door because people didn't use the front door, and they went in the garden to the back door, the neighbors. So they clomped up the stairs. We lived on the floor above, and that's what I remember, them banging on the door and going up the stairs. And my mother and my aunt showed them the papers. They said they were Christians. They had false names, and eventually the officers said they didn't believe them. They would come back in a week. And so all the neighbors told the Morin family to get rid of us. It was dangerous for them. But they were very good people, so they didn't throw us out. And the officers came back a week later, and it was the same again. My grandparents were in bed. We were under the bed, and eventually they left. They didn't search the place. Maybe they didn't feel like arresting people. There were a good Germans as
It's like
well.
a miracle, because in so many cases it didn't happen that
We
way.
had a couple of miracles, really miracles. And this was one of them.
And the people that were hiding you, the Maron, when they found out that you were Jewish, did it make a difference? Because it was endangering them.
Because he was an atheist, and apparently he said to the friends who told him to get rid of us, he said, God sent them to me. I won't get rid of them.
It's amazing.
They were very good people.
Because he endangered his...
Yes.
Did they have any children?
They had a son, but they weren't in contact with him. That's why the grandson got the medal for them from Yad Vashem.
And what did your mother do for food? Did she manage to... Did you go hungry, or did you always have a little bit of food?
We didn't have quite enough, but we survived on what we had. We ate bread that wasn't very good. And my brother went to glean with Monsieur Morin when the harvest was done. And then we made flour, and my mother baked bread and went to the local bakery to bake it. That was very good. We had potatoes and vegetables because Monsieur Morin was a keen gardener, and he had vegetables in his garden, and we didn't have oranges and bananas. We didn't know. My brother tried to explain to me how chocolate tasted. I only knew a lump of sugar. I didn't know what chocolate tasted like.
And during these years, did your mother teach you a little bit, or?
Yes. We didn't go to school, as I said, so my mother tried to teach us. My grandfather taught Hebrew to my brother, Pirkei Avot, and he taught him chess. My grandfather was very talented and inventive. He made a monopoly at the end of the war to entertain us. So we didn't have many games. I had a little doll that a priest gave me, and that's all. When I see what my grandchildren and great-grandchildren play with, I'm amazed.
And Charlotte, can I ask, the priests, were they Roman Catholic or Protestant?
It was towards the end of the war.
But you know which
There was-
denomination? If they were Roman Catholic priests or
Jesuits.
Jesuits? But they
There
were
was a Jesuit college in the village.
and they took in the two girls.
No, they went to Brussels
They went to
to a
Brussels.
priest. And they survived. I've got pictures of them, my two cousins.
What were, are they still alive, your cousins?
No,
And
they
what
were older than me.
what were their names?
Betty and Miriam Cohn.
And their mother, it was too dangerous. She couldn't go see them, or she couldn't have any information.
No, she didn't have any contact with them until after the war. And they were reunited with my uncle, and they lived in America, the family.
And can I ask, when you were in hiding, did you manage to go out of the house? You said you played with the children.
After the two officers, the second time they came, and they left us alone, so I went out. But I could speak German. I spoke German to my parents and grandparents, and Yiddish. So I understood everything the Germans, they liked little children. They came and patted me on my head and said something, and I could understand everything. But I knew that I mustn't show that I understood.
And with the other children, did they ask, how come you're not going to school? Or did anybody, were they suspicious?
No.
And
we played with them, and they didn't ask anything.
And the neighbors, did your mother make any contact with the neighbors? Or
there was a farm a couple of doors away from where we were, and there was a very religious lady from Antwerp with 3 boys, and I played with the 3 boys as well, and nobody asked anything from
and
the
with your
neighbor.
brother, nobody asked him either?
No, not that I know of.
That's another major miracle.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to pretend to go to church? Or
No. We never went to church. We kept our Chagim. We kept Shabbat.
you kept Shabbat in?
My mother lit candles in the evening on Friday night. And my grandfather was a very religious, and he knew a lot. So he kept the dates of the Chagim, and we baked matzahs on Pesach, and we kept the candle ends on Friday night, and we made little candles for Hanukkah. We tried.
And you kept kosher possibly during this
No.
time? That must have been virtually impossible.
I remember eating meat and chicken at the Morans. My mother sent me down to eat with them.
And were they very loving towards you?
Very, very affectionate. They were not so old. I imagined that they were very old. They must have been about in their 60s. So my mother was in her 30s. So they were very young. And my grandfather shaved his beard before we, at the beginning of the war, and he was quite friendly with Monsieur Morin, and they made things together.
Charlotte, I just have to ask you again, when they found out that you were Jewish, because it's a very big deal. It could have impacted their lives unbelievably.
Yes.
Did you
When
feel-
my grandmother died, when she was very ill, my mother and Monsieur Morin took her to Brussels, very dangerous, to the hospital. And when she died there, they buried her in Brussels, in a non-Jewish cemetery.
At least she had a funeral. She had a,
Yeah. After the war, she was taken to a Jewish cemetery.
And during the she was taken to a Jewish cemetery.
It was across the border
In Holland?
In Holland.
And during this time, did your mother have any contact with your father?
At the beginning, through the Red Cross and through America, so they took a long time to get there and back, and eventually no contact. I don't think my father knew where we were.
It must have been so difficult for him, not knowing what had happened
Yes.
to his family.
That's war.
And what other memories do you have of during the war while you were in hiding?
Not very much. My brother said it was boring most of the time, with bits of terror in between. I was not unhappy. I played with the children, and Monsieur and Madame Morin spoiled me. And he, at the end of the war, was very fond of Israel, and he didn't know why other countries hated Israel. And he wrote me letters, a lot of letters. I kept in contact with him until he passed away. Yes.
And can I ask, while near the end of the war or during your hiding, was there any fighting going on near the village where you were staying?
Yes. Towards the end, there was, we were sent into this Jesuit college, and they said they would burn the houses around. And we were there 2 nights, I remember very clearly. And there was, when we went, it was night time, and bullets were flying overhead. And when we got there, we could hear bombs. And the Americans were very close already. And then I could hear the people praying every time a bomb fell. The Ave Maria all the time. And I could say it by heart, but I've forgotten it. So then we went back to Monsieur and Madame Morin, and they didn't go with us. I don't know, maybe they did. I think all the village were sent to this college. It was a big college, and it had been the headquarters of the German army here in the village. And then there was the Battle of the Bulge, and it started again, the fighting, and then we were liberated by the Americans.
Do you remember the day of liberation?
Very, very clearly. And there was an American Jewish soldier who asked if there were any Jews in the village, so they pointed to us. And he was a young 21, 22, religious American soldier, and we kept in touch with him. He came to visit us with his wife in London, and we went to him in America, and we wrote until he died.
It's incredible. And when did you reunite with your with the two girls.
after the war.
So here's their picture again. And their mother must have been overcome with emotion when
Yes.
she heard that they were still alive.
They were a bit peculiar after the war. The priest told them that Jewish is not good. And they had to, we didn't have psychological counseling at that time. So they did it themselves. They overcame.
And how was the relationship with their mother? It must have been to have been separated.
At the beginning it was a bit difficult.
But at the end, did they become,
Yes.
they connected and they became
They
close?
moved to America, the whole family, and they married Jewish men. And they were loving.
And sort of, when did you first hear about your father? Or when did he hear that you had survived and your family had survived?
This American soldier was sent to London, and he contacted my father. And I think through the Red Cross we made contact.
And how long did it take till you made contact with your father after the war?
I think not long.
But it's a miracle that a Jewish soldier happened to be
Yeah,
in it, and he was the one that went to England to
right.
notify your father.
And then he went back to America and met my mother's sisters and family. Yes.
And do you remember when your mother told you that your father, that he was...
Yes. I sucked my thumb till I was 5, and my mother tried to get me off it. And she said it was not psychologically right. She said, if I finish sucking my thumb, my father will come back. But he didn't. I saw him 2 years later.
It took 2 years.
Maybe when I was 8, 3 years later. And he sent us parcels. We went to Brussels for a year. We had no apartments left in Antwerp. So
What happened to the apartment was... Did some other people take it over?
yeah,
And all the furniture and everything that was inside?
all gone. But we lived in Brussels. My brother had bar mitzvah in Brussels without my father.
Was it difficult for him to come financially?
No. He wanted to become British, and he had to be in Britain for 7 years, I think. He wanted to bring us to England, and my mother wasn't very sure that she wanted to live out of Belgium. It was a different language and everything. And so we came in 1947 to England, and I started to go to the Hasmonean in London.
Before, when you came, did you go with your grandfather as well?
My grandfather was with us when we went back to Antwerp. We lived a year in Brussels, and then we went back to Antwerp with my grandfather, and I went to a Jewish school in Antwerp. I was
Do you remember
very
the name?
the Tarkimoni,
Tarkimoni.
and I was very happy to be among Jewish children.
And when
Again,
you were in Brussels, did you go to school as well?
a non-Jewish school.
And was it difficult being in a
I
non-Jewish
can't
school?
remember anything from Brussels. It's like amnesia.
And your brother's bar mitzvah, do you remember that?
I remember that. I remember him repeating the parasha.
And your grandfather was there?
Yes.
Can I just ask, Charlotte, and it's a very difficult question, was your mother or was your brother and you were upset that your father wasn't there for the bar mitzvah?
Yes.
Because it's a big thing.
Yeah. There were very few people at the bar mitzvah because we didn't know many people now.
And how was it like coming back to Antwerp? Were there many survivors or many people, many Jews who had survived returned?
Some. I remember the lady who was with the 3 sons at the farm next to us. Her husband came back and it was very moving. He came back from the camps and we all went to the railway station in Godin to welcome him. And it was a very big moment.
Must have been incredibly emotional.
Yeah.
Incredibly. And where did you stay in Antwerp when you came back? Was it in the Jewish area?
In the same street, in the same building, but not on the same floor.
And who were the children that were in the Jewish school? Were they also survivors or those children that you...
I think many. But I was so happy to be in a Jewish school. I was there only for a year.
And can I ask, at this time, did you speak with each other about your experiences in the war?
No. I never spoke when I went to the Hasmonean, and there was in the Jewish Chronicle, not this, but when we were at the ceremony for Yad Vashem for these people, they wrote it in the Jewish Chronicle. And my best friend from school, who I sat next to all the years, she married and came to Israel. And her sister used to send her the JC from every week. And then she wrote to me that she saw the story in the JC and how come she never knew about me.
You never spoke about it?
No.
Shana, can I just ask, how was the encounter when you first saw your father when you came to England?
He came to Belgium a few times when we were living in Antwerp.
This was after your brother's bar mitzvah?
Yes.
And when you first saw your father when he came to Antwerp?
It was very strange.
Because you didn't know him.
Yes. He sent presents when he was living in England and we were living in Antwerp. He sent me presents, a necklace, a bracelet. I can't remember what I was feeling when I first met
And your
him.
brother? Did your brother develop a close bond with your father?
Yes, I also developed a close relationship because my mother, who were with us all the time, who was with us all the time, I was very close to my mother because I didn't have a father. So when she passed away, I got very close to my father.
And your mother and your father were being separated all this time. Did they redevelop?
I think they sent my brother and me to boarding school, to the Husband Inn boarding school. There were lots of orphan children there after the war. And we went in 1947 for 2 years to the boarding school.
And where did your parents stay? Were they in
My father had a small apartment in Stamford Hill in London, and she was with him, and I think they sent us to boarding school to get to know each other again.
It must be incredibly difficult.
Very difficult. I can't imagine it.
And at the boarding school, you felt with the other Jewish children and the teachers, did you feel very...
I was very
really
happy there,
And you made friends quickly?
very quickly, and I learned English in 3 months.
In 3 months?
Yes, I forgot a lot of French while learning.
Did you ever meet Rabbi Schoenfeld?
Yes, he used to come to the assembly once a month at the school. And I spoke to him from time to time. He was an amazing man.
He's one of the unsung heroes. He really is.
Yes.
And with those children in the boarding school, was
Some of them were orphans.
And was it
Some
some-
of them were who Dr. Schoenfeld brought over.
But between you and your friends, you never discussed the war
No,
years?
never.
Did anybody ask you?
No.
It's incredible.
We didn't ask our parents a lot of questions that we were asking ourselves, my brother and me, after my parents died.
And can I ask, during this time, did you and your brother discuss what had happened during the war, or did you discuss it between...
No, nothing, until we were quite old.
And with your parents, did your father ever ask you, or your brother?
No, we never discussed it. We never mentioned the war years to my parents.
Do you think
I don't know why.
you felt it would upset them, or they felt it would upset you?
We looked towards the future. We lived for the present. We didn't think about the past.
And with your children, did you discuss? Did they know that
Yes.
you...
And my husband was also a hidden child in Poland. So they knew what their parents went through.
And where did you meet your husband?
He was a friend of my brother. I lived in Antwerp. No. We went to England, and then when my mother died,
How old were you when your mother died?
I was just before my 16th birthday. And I said I would never love anybody because it hurts too much. I was very close to my mother. So when I met my husband, I fell in love with him. And I was living in America for a couple of years with my mother's sister, because when my mother died, I was alone with my brother at home. My father, his business was not good in London, so he went every week to Antwerp. He was in the diamond business, and he came home for Shabbat. So my aunt said, it's not good for a young girl to be alone with her brother. We had a housekeeper who came and looked after the house. And so I lived with my aunt for 2 years in America. My father remarried and went to live in Antwerp. He bought an apartment there and sold the house in London. My brother lived somewhere in a little flat. He was studying.
He didn't want to join you in America?
He was studying here in university in London. So then my father wanted me to be in Antwerp with his wife and him. So I left America. I moved around a lot and went to live in Antwerp. And my brother knew my husband, who was living in London. His parents lived in Antwerp, and everybody knew each other in Antwerp. So my brother came for the Yom Tovim to Antwerp to be with my father, and my husband, his friend, went to his parents in Antwerp, and that's how I met him. And we moved to London when we were married.
And when you went to America with your aunt, were you close with your aunt?
Yes, she was a wonderful person. And I had two boy cousins living there, single, and I enjoyed myself very much in America. I liked to live there, but I had to go back. And then in 1957, just when I moved to Antwerp, I went with a youth group to Israel for the first time. I fell in love with Israel. I wanted to live here, but my father wouldn't hear of it. I was about 19 at the time, and we listened to our parents at that time. So I went back to Antwerp, and I lived there for 3 years. I worked as a secretary in a diamond office. I studied art. I studied fashion illustration. I can show you.
It's beautiful.
What I made. That's what I wanted to work in.
And you studied this in Antwerp?
Started in London, didn't finish, and then I went back, went to America and went to college there. And when
Are these your own designs?
Yes.
That's magnificent.
I illustrated. I didn't design them.
This is your
my
drawing,
sketches.
your sketches.
So when I went back to Antwerp, I didn't want to start it again. I didn't graduate. I didn't have time. So I became a secretary in a diamond office for 3 years until I married. And then I moved to London and helped my husband in the office. And then I had children.
And when did you come to Israel?
13 years ago. I made Aliyah just on my own. My husband passed away 16 years ago.
And how many years were you married?
47. Those were the happiest years in my life.
Charlotte, you've had a hard life. You've had a very not so
Eventful life.
Very eventful.
Yes, I moved around.
And your children, you have one of your children live in Bnei Brak?
My son, he became a chassid. He went back to his roots. My eldest daughter, my eldest child, lives in London, lived in Manchester for 30 years and went back to London to her 3 children and grandchildren. And one of her sons, my oldest grandchild, lives in Ramat Bet Shemesh, so I see them a lot. And my youngest daughter, who is a pediatrician, she studied doctor, and she lives in Ma'ale Adumim. So I see her every week. She comes for lunch here.
And you're happy that you came and made Aliyah?
Very happy. I always wanted to live in Israel. And I feel at home here.
Can I ask, during your lifetime, did you always keep your emunah?
Yes.
It's amazing. It's really because
we lived a traditional Jewish life, my husband and I, and my children went to Jewish schools, the Hasmonean in London.
So I would like to ask you, you have some amazing pictures. If you could just, if you could just explain, because these are very, very precious pictures.
Yes, they were taken from small to made bigger.
And enlarged.
This is my mother, this is myself, and these are the good people, the very good people. Joseph and Leonie Morin.
And how did you manage to achieve that they got Chasidei Motalam, that they were recognized righteous amongst nations?
We started at the very beginning, and it took a long time, and they just stopped. The Yad Vashem forgot about it, and then we came to Israel, my brother and myself, and started all over again. And it was in the, I think, early 90s. I can't remember dates.
There's a picture. This is a picture where they were awarded the son, yes. the grandson.
The grandson was awarded by the, I think, ambassador to Israel. And my brother and I made speeches at it was quite a big thing.
And this was
local rabbi came, the chief rabbi of the town came, and a lot of dignitaries.
And this is a picture of... When was this picture taken? Was this after the war?
Yes. It doesn't have a date, but I was about 9 years old.
And you kept in touch all the years?
Yes, I wrote.
And did you go and visit?
Yes, I went with my children, with my husband. And she was not alive anymore. She died much before him. He lived until over 90. I kept his letters.
So Charlotte, can I just ask you, and this is such a difficult question to ask, and I don't know if there's even an answer, but if you were put into the position that this very righteous couple were put in, what would one have done? Because
we always ask ourselves, survivors, what if we were to be put into that position? I really don't know.
It's one of the most difficult questions.
Very difficult.
But there are no words, because what they did and what they sacrificed for total strangers, it's...
Really. And we kept in touch. And they didn't really need anything. When my husband, those that saved him in Poland, he was in Krakow during the whole war. And that's his story. Much worse than my story. But the people who saved him were also righteous Gentiles from Yad Vashem. We had the ceremony in Krakow, in Poland. So I told my friends who were saved, who were hidden, that they should do the same.
It's so important.
Yad Vashem. It's very important.
And Charlotte, if I can ask, what message do you give to your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and to the future generations?
That I hoped they would never have to go through the same. When they were the ages of my husband and myself, I wondered how they would cope. And I was always grateful that they didn't have to go through such a thing.
Well, Charlotte, I just want to thank you. If I can just thank you. So for me, it's been such an honor and a privilege to be with you.
Really?
And I'm so grateful. There are no words, because your story
I wasn't in the camps. I was
miracles,
very lucky.
But the miracles that to put in hiding nearly an entire family, it's very unique. It's very...
Yeah,
and
we were very lucky to be with our mother.
Well, you should only have mazel and bracha and to
Thank
be well.
you.
And I am, from the bottom of my heart, I'm extremely grateful to you.
Thank you.
And you know what's so wonderful to see you so positive.
Thank
you
God.
did go through. You went through.
But I have a very lovely family.
So Baruch Hashem, you should only have mazel bracha and all of Hashem's blessings.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Charlotte. I'm really grateful.
It was okay.
It wasn't okay. It was unbelievable. Charlotte, thank you very, very much.